Ghana was very much a microcosm of his vision for the entire African continent.
On the eve of Ghana's independence, Nkrumah made a statement that the independence of Ghana was meaningless unless it was linked up with the total liberation of the African continent.
We dedicate ourselves not only in the struggle to emancipate all the territories in Africa. Our independence is meaningless unless it links up with the total liberation of the African continent.
And so it was, Vice President, that from the very first day of her independence, Ghana served as a real base for the total liberation of our continent.
Nkrumah gave practical expression to this declaration by, first of all, organizing the All-African People's Conference of 1958, at which all the liberation movements in Africa participated and formulated strategies for overthrowing colonialism.
Nkrumah gave enormous logistical and practical support to various liberation movements, such as Patrice Lumumba of the Congo, Amilcar Cabral of Guinea-Bissau, and Kenneth Kaunda of present-day Zambia, and many others.
He invited George Patmore to serve as his advisor for African affairs. And he also invited the man who had been the president of the 5 Pan-African Congress, the first Pan-Africanist Congress, all the way through the 5th Pan-Africanist Congress, W.E.B. Du Bois. He invited him to serve as his minister for Encyclopedia Africana.
Ghana had become the Socialist Republic of Ghana because health care, education was free.
There's an African saying which, simply put, means he who has his mouth in the kitchen of his enemy can never be liberated. And Nkrumah sought to take our mouth from the kitchen of the metropolis.
Kwame Nkrumah believed in developing a new way forward where African economies could be transformed to cater for the needs of their own people without being dependent totally on external forces.
One of the things that Nkrumah did was to establish a huge cattle ranch to provide the meat that our people needed. He also established a tannery to produce the leather, and then established a shoe factory to turn the leather that has been produced by the tannery into shoes and other leather products for our people.
1964, I was 21 years old. I came to Ghana and what I witnessed was just phenomenal. I didn't want to leave. I see new schools being built every day, free education. I see new hospitals being built, new clinics, free health care. I see factories being built by Africans. Not by Chinese, not by South Koreans, but by Africans.
In Ghana, you go there and you see African pilots. You see African news presenters. You hear African music, African clothes. And down in Ghana, we got our own national bank.
Nkrumah also established the Black Star Line, which was a shipping line to promote trade between the African countries and Africans in the diaspora and so on.
The significance of the flag of Ghana, and that is the symbolism held in the star.
Just as Kwame Nkrumah said that the African can determine his own future if he's left alone. And the star, it really represents that star that Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Marcus Garvey, had for the Black Star Liner.
This would have moved Africa toward economic independence. That antagonized the West.
And particularly Nkrumah's ambitions to unite the African continent within the context of a union government for Africa also made Nkrumah and his ideas a danger to imperialist interests.
Cocoa at that time, alongside gold, was one of the key primary products that Ghana was exporting in order to derive foreign exchange and capital to manage its economy.
Prices began to decline considerably, and therefore this correlated with the declining living standards of most Ghanaians.
From a high of 400 pounds per ton of cocoa in sometime 1965, it had fallen to about 80 pounds.
We also have to remember that this decline in the cocoa prices was manipulated by various Western powers who wished to impose an economic squeeze on Kwame Nkrumah's government. And as a result, many Ghanaians became economically and also politically disenchanted with Nkrumah's government.
He pegs wages at a time when inflation is raging. Not only does he do that, he demands that workers contribute to a compulsory savings scheme. And that meant that you took some of your wages, but the rest of your wages were produced as a bond, which you could cash in, I can't remember, 3 years or 4 years' time. And of course, these bits of paper were never produced.
In addition to that, there was also a rise in corruption amongst officials, state officials and CPP officials that led many Ghanaians to question the CPP.
The National Liberation Movement had taken the part of terrorism against Nkrumah. Supporters of Nkrumah were being killed on a regular basis. They were exploding bombs across the country and so on, and generally creating a situation of insecurity.
He had a vision for the future. He was not really working for that year. He does not work for the public consumption. He was just doing it for the right reason. And that is why a lot of people fell apart and started to be confused and, doubting his intentions. They thought he was misguided.
Imperialist forces stepped up their opposition, stepped up their action. There was about 6 or 7 attempts on Nkrumah's life.
In the 60s, there were many assassination attempts on Nkrumah, and one of them actually took place in the Flagstaff House, where he had his office and also his residence.
A police officer was planted to shoot Nkrumah.
This was a police officer on guard duty who attempted to shoot him with his rifle.
He came and just opened the door, and at that time Nkrumah was behind that door. It was a very heavy door. So he knocked him with the door and he fell. And Nkrumah himself disarmed him because he knew some basic techniques. Nkrumah liked jogging, he likes walking, he likes exercising, he likes doing judo, karate, these little things.
And you can see from the picture behind me, Nkrumah putting down an assassin, somebody who tried to assassinate him.
These activities of sabotage, bombing, continued throughout the regime. Some of the actions he had to take to deal with the sabotage included the Preventive Detention Act, where people who were involved in this acts of sabotage and destabilization were imprisoned.
Today, countries like the United States of America, countries like the United Kingdom, have passed legislation which is similar to the Preventive Detention Act. Are we to say today that David Cameron is a dictator? Are we to say that Barack Obama is a dictator? Because they've essentially passed the same laws. Those laws were passed in response to the anarchy and recklessness of the opposition to Nkrumah. I remember the story which was put out by the opposition to Nkrumah, that Nkrumah was keeping people in jail and maltreating them and so on. And they got photographs published in London and other places. Eventually it turned out that those photographs had been taken from a Togolese prison rather than a Ghanaian prison.
Now, I'm only beginning this research. In 2 days in the National Archives in Washington, apart from finding that the consul was helping people form opposition political parties, I also found that in 1964, so 2 years before the coup, the head of the CIA has a meeting with the head of the State Department, their Foreign Office, and says, I really think General Nkrumah would be the best person to take over. Now, if he says that in February 1964, it means he has already been dealing with the people plotting the takeovers and deciding whom to help with the takeover.
There's one very, very significant cable which was dispatched from the British High Commission in Accra, and the British High Commissioner in Accra then was A.W. Snelling, who dispatched a cable to the Home Office which simply said that the British establishment had to get rid of Nkrumah because he was making the African too politically conscious. What damning evidence.
The factors that led to the coup that overthrew Kwame Nkrumah's government can be separated into internal factors and external factors. Among them were the declining economic situation in the country, whereby 1965, Ghana only had £500,000 in sterling in their reserve account. Nkrumah's perceived meddling, interference with the army and the police, particularly after the 1964 assassination attempt on him. He had removed the police chief, and in the subsequent year, 1965, he'd also demoted several of the generals. Another important factor was also the fact that he had set up a new military structure known as the Presidential Own Guard Regiment with its own security apparatus, and this was perceived as a threat by the army. However, the most critical external factor in the coup d'etat was the plotting and conspiracy by the United States of America, Britain and France with their neo-colonial agents in the army, the Ghana Army and the Ghana Police Force. They acted in concert to overthrow Kwame Nkrumah.
Now, all of these forces, Western intelligence forces and Western governments, plotted systematically against Nkrumah, recruited local collaborators and so on, in order to get rid of Nkrumah, not because Nkrumah was bad for the Ghanaian and African people, but simply because Nkrumah wanted to stop the exploitation of our resources for the benefit of others.
Nkrumah had a slogan that when you're talking to the imperialists and he's smiling, he comes in, oh, hello, hello, how are you? Then he's making profit on you. But when the imperialist comes to sit with a straight face, it means the business is straightforward.
In 1965, Osajifo Kwame Nkrumah wrote a book called Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. In this book, Kwame Nkrumah lays out the grand master plan for Europe and America's recolonization of Africa, and did it elaborately. The Western world read that book and said, this man has to go.
24th of February 1966 coup took place when Nkrumah was out of the country. He was invited by President Ho Chi Minh, the leader of North Vietnam, to participate in peace initiatives to end the Vietnam War between Vietnam and America.
Troops were moved from Kumasi and Accra. They attacked Flagstaff House, fought the president's own regimental guard. After that, they took over broadcasting. They made an announcement to the country that the myth surrounding Nkrumah has been broken.
That was one of the worst moments in the history of the entire African continent, the celebration of traitors. I spent that whole morning moving around Accra with friends of mine, and we saw the carnage which was being unleashed on the city by these soldiers. I saw Nkrumah's security men arrested and beaten up. I saw them with bayonets in their chests and so on.
He asked me whether I understood the meaning of a coup, and I told him that, well, when the military takes over from a civilian government, they said, he cracked the joke that is the dictionary meaning, but they said this is the beginning of a history in Africa. There will be several coups in Africa, and Africa will sink, and then a new Africa will develop out of the mess.
Nkrumah went into exile in Guinea, but managed to keep touch with the people of Ghana through frequent broadcasts.
I came to Guinea early '68, and this is when we proposed to Kwame Nkrumah to allow us to bring him back to Ghana, because we were ready to bring him back with guns blazing. I mean, we were young and we were ready and excited, pumped up. Kwame Nkrumah looked at us, and smiled. He took the guns out of our hands and put books in our hands. It was quite frustrating for me at the time. I didn't really understand. But thank God he did. In his infinite wisdom, he knew we didn't know what we were doing. He knew that we needed to study.
As co-president of Guinea, he helped shape economic and political policies and so on. But in addition to that, Nkrumah wrote a lot in